This talk is actually the result of academic research at the School of Design at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. And I worked with a small team for 3 years, studying some of the best design thinkers, facilitators, organizational change catalysts that I've ever met in the world. And we looked at people that practice co-creation across a lot of different industries. Everything from design education, which you just experienced, to urban planning and product design. So from 2013 to 2016, we did the research that led to this framework. And I'm really grateful for all the people that shared their wisdom with us as a team. They didn't have to do that. They didn't have to share their secrets with us, but they did. And we did a lot of amazing things together. And tonight I get to share what we discovered with you guys. So design as a discipline strives to bring the new into the world as innovative products, services, processes, strategies, business models in effective and elegant ways. For it's our capacity to create, to innovate, and to reinvent that enables us not only to survive in this world, but to thrive. And as practicing or perhaps inspiring professionals here, you've all been taught different models of design thinking and innovation. This here is one way to look at it, and the model focuses on the skills required to innovate. So skills from idea generation and concept development to testing and analyzing. These are all core skills that we need. This is a different model. This is a learning by doing model, where we might start by creating a solution, and then we find new problems, and we create another iteration of the solution, and this journey goes along. And here's the double diamond model. This is perhaps the one that we're most familiar with here in San Diego. After all, it is what we teach in the local universities. So when you apply this model to something like product design, you might end up with this. Anybody recognize this product? Vacuum. Right, what kind of vacuum? That is a Dyson, right? It took them 20 years to make this vacuum, okay? They had over 5,000 prototypes. All but one of them was a miss, okay? And I think Thomas Edison captured this well, this spirit of how we go about doing actual product design with this quote. And this leads me to the two questions that I want to address in tonight's talk. First, how can we increase the innovative outputs of our creative teams? And second, is it possible to actually facilitate or design for breakthrough innovations? To answer these questions, we have to come back and look at the double diamond design model and ask ourselves, what's missing from this established model? When I look at this, I see great things. I follow this model all the time. I teach this model at UCSD. But this is a knowledge journey. It's great. But what isn't captured here is the experience of the team itself. Humans are not just minds. We have emotions. We exist in relationships, both of which profoundly impact our creativity as individuals and especially in groups. Now, every facilitator knows this, yet rarely are these dimensions of human creativity included in design thinking models. And tonight, my goal is to change that. This slide highlights two other dimensions of innovation and culture change processes. The first is the emotional experience. The second is team dynamics. Now, my experience as a facilitator and designer, these vary quite a bit by team and by project. And if we plotted out the highs and lows, it might look like something that's illustrated here. One of the key insights that I learned working with change facilitators is that we can design for these curves. To say it another way, we can intentionally design the experience of the creative team itself to facilitate more innovative outcomes and potentially breakthroughs. And this is what lies really at the heart of co-creation. Now, if we want to be creative, to really solve the big problems like the ones that Layla brought up tonight, and the small problems that we deal with every day on our teams, or maybe to create lasting change in the world, we need more than design thinking workshops. We should be striving for those special moments of synchronicity and collective insight. We should be tapping into the talent and the opportunity that we are always surrounded by. Co-creation is one answer to this challenge. And in my definition, it's a special form of collective creativity that harnesses the potential of teams and can generate those breakthroughs. In co-creation, collective moments of insight emerge from the space between which is described not in terms of process or knowledge or mechanics, but in terms of a feeling of flow and synchronicity that new ideas just spring forth. When I was talking to people and doing interviews for years, and I asked them, I said, you know, have you had one of these experiences? And some people said yes. I said, what was it like? How would you define that? What were the ingredients, right? I was like trying to drill into the nuts and bolts of it, and none of them could really answer me. But always they were able to answer me in experiential terms, right? Serendipity, synchronicity, flow, surprise. And I said, well, that's interesting. That doesn't come in any design thinking book I know. So maybe we need to be designing for those things. And from those experiences, then the great ideas will come, right? So a lot of our book is focused on this model. Like, how do you create this space and hold it long enough for good ideas to come forth? So here's a few things that you can use co-creation for, okay? First, it's a great process that taps into the collective potential of groups to generate insights and innovation. It's really especially useful when you're trying to break through and come up with breakthrough solutions when your existing ideas or models just aren't cutting it. And finally, it's really great for bringing together very diverse people, often who might argue, to face a common challenge and come out with a way forward towards that challenge. Now, these are some of the frameworks that I studied over the years, and these are all practices around the world that use co-creation in different ways. The Nowhere Group works with Fortune 50 companies to do leadership development. I Lead in Design is a K-12 educational format that started in Monterey, California, and then was done at the Green School in Bali for many years. Brains on the Beach is a group of organizational change facilitators that use it. The Institute for Cultural Affairs developed something called the Technology of Participation, and this is based upon the framework that they used in the 1970s and 80s and 90s with the World Health Organization and the United Nations. The MIT Ideation Lab has something called the Presencing Institute that Peter Senge and Otto Scharmer lead, and that very much is co-creative. And the Bridge Fellowship is another leadership training program in Hong Kong and in India, right? So there's lots of different ways of using co-creation. It's not limited to design. It's especially useful in organizational change, but you can use it in pretty much any sector. So what is it, right? Now, if you ask your colleagues or pretty much anyone in San Diego or in AI what co-creation is, you're going to get a range of answers, and this is a bit problematic. Like the term innovation, it's become so widely used that it actually lacks the specificity it needs to be truly useful. So for many, co-creation means, hey, let's get a bunch of people together and make something. I'm sorry, that's not co-creation. For us, co-creation is an outcome of intentional experience design. And so we needed to create an operationalized definition, kind of like defining product requirements, right? You need to know what you're designing for so that it actually works and you can test it. And so this is our operational definition. And I just want to point out a couple aspects of it that might be a little bit different than what you've heard before. So a process with diverse stakeholders that are actively engaged, great. You just did that if you were here in the workshop, okay? But was it mutually empowering? Does everybody feel like they were heard? Their voice mattered? And are they energized to actually move forward with the decision that came out of the process? That's mutual empowerment, okay? Collective creativity, you get that. The last part, experiential and practical outcomes. Pretty much every program I've ever designed for a company has a set of practical outcomes. We want a new strategy for our product. We want to figure out what our action plan is for the next quarter. We want blah, 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 blah. Okay, great, you need those. But what about the experience of the team that's going through that process? If you start to define outcomes for them that are experiential, like, hey, we would like our team to learn to communicate better with each other, or hey, we would like to have an opportunity for people that work in different divisions of this organization to actually get to know and empathize with each other, that's a different design. Because then you're going for two sets of goals, and both of them are important. And what I argue is that if you meet the experiential goals, practical outcomes become easier. So in the field of design, like if we scope this down, co-creation often involves users in the design process. It also can utilize a wide range of different experts that come into the design process from different fields. And when you do it, it creates a sense of community and brand loyalty through user engagement, and we call that value co-creation. If you were to diagram where co-creation sits on this levels of user engagement graph, it's kind of an encompassing model that on one side has human-centered design, and on the other side has co-creative design, or co-design, which you just went through, and it wraps itself around all four. And there are variations of co-creation kind of towards one pole or the other, depending on the type of event you want to facilitate. It's not a monolithic framework. It's a pretty flexible framework, so you can use it in different contexts. This is one context it's being used in right now. So my co-author in the book, Matti Hamalainen, works at the Mobility Lab in Helsinki, and this is an EU-funded project where they are co-creating with a whole range of people, including the community, to rethink this port in Helsinki. And they're doing some pretty interesting things. And they've chosen, the EU has chosen Matti to be the core facilitator using this model to kind of coordinate the discussions around what people are going to do. Now, this is a really fantastic idea. I hope I've sold you on it. You're like, yeah, give me more, I want to buy that. How do I do that now? Well, there's a couple metaphors I'm going to introduce tonight, and the first one is cooking. How many of you cook? Wow, that's a good number of people. Nice, sexual diversity, it's great. Okay, good. I cook too. And when you cook, you have two things that you work with. First is your ingredients. Right, you got to get the ingredients together. And then second, there's the process. And you need both. And the same thing's true with co-creation. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through the process at a very high level, and then I'm going to break it down in a little bit more detail. Okay, so this is for you process folks that are like, all right, I need steps 1 through 10 for this. Okay, first, identify your objectives and plan the project. Okay, and I'm going to come back to that visual shortly. Figure out who you need to have involved in the process. Identify gaps in their knowledge and skills. Then from that understanding, you build your team. Okay, and then you need to train your team. Wait a second, this is a little bit different than design thinking. How many design thinking workshops have you been through where you had to do skills development? Not many. This is a pretty important part of co-creation, and we're borrowing this from organizational development. Okay, once you have done that skill development, then you start to build a shared knowledge pool and start to produce new knowledge as a team. And then you get to the secret sauce, collective intelligence. When you have created a field of shared knowledge that's powerful enough that you can start working as one unit towards a mutual goal. Then, of course, you record and you document your process, and you come back for piloting and testing. Now, this is a very high-level view, and one of the things I want to call it about this process is that the vast majority of steps are simply preparing the team. The journey itself can be very quick, or it can be long. But preparing the team is a really core part of co-creation that leads to those better outcomes. And preparing that team begins with a very clear plan. So I mentioned before having both practical and experiential outcomes. Okay. I like to write a creative brief where both of these are included, and you think about what is the coming journey, right, that we want people to go through. And I look at this from two different lenses. One is the lens of systems thinking. And my idea with systems thinking is that innovative ideas are an emergent property of a well-designed system. The goal then is to design that system. If you think about it and you put on your facilitator's hat though, it's through intentional experience design that we foster and harness the power of collective intelligence, which then leads to those outcomes. Both of these kind of ways of thinking about it and looking at it are really vital to co-creation. And you can look at it both ways. And it's really interesting. Matti, my co-author, came from a mechanical engineering background. So the only way that he could understand co-creation was the systems model, right? When I would talk about facilitation to him and things like energy and flow and holding tension, he would be like, go off and meditate on the mountain. I need to understand the system. And I was like, no, it's important. And he'd be like, you don't pay attention to thermodynamics, I do. And I said, okay, fine. And guess what? We were both right. So that's why I think you can approach co-creation for really either angle and understand it. But both are really needed. So here's our systems design model. And what we talk about a lot when we facilitate co-creation is building a container. Okay. The space between is the experience that we're trying to create and hold throughout the entire journey. To use the cooking metaphor again, This set of ingredients consists of people, process, and environment. And these can also be broken down. Each has a split half, and so I'm going to spend just a couple minutes talking about the ingredients, and then I'm going to move on to talk about the process. Okay, so when we think about the ingredients of people, there's your stakeholders and your team, and those are not necessarily the same. When you think about the stakeholders of any creative product or project, right, there are the people that sponsor it, but are very rarely involved in the actual process of creating it, right? So maybe it's the CEO, the COO, the CTO, the CPO, you know, one of those C's, right? Maybe it is the principal in a school or the dean of a college, you know, maybe it's the community leader, and they're like, we need to do this. Lisa, you're in charge. Go figure it out, right? Now, they may not be part of the journey that you go through in the team, but they are really important in terms of both setting the goals and evaluating the outcomes of the process. So that's what I mean by stakeholders. Stakeholders can also be, if you're in the product world, your end users, right? Or the other people within your business that you have to report to. And they may or may not be involved in the direct team, but their set of needs and expected outcomes need to be considered. Right? Now, I love to involve those people in the process as much as possible. There's nothing I enjoy more than making CEOs profoundly uncomfortable. Right? I love making CEOs play with Legos, for example, and they think it's the worst waste of their time on the planet until they realize that Legos are an amazing way to rethink subjects. Right? If you guys have ever heard of a framework called Lego Serious Play, that's also very co-creative. And you literally use Legos to do ideation and strategic planning. And of course, you know, most CEOs will just laugh at you, but anyone that's actually gone through a successful facilitation learns to believe in the process because it brings back play. It brings back that creative child that we've shut away in some box, right? And so bringing these stakeholders, these sometimes external stakeholders into the process is really, really valuable as much as you can. And then of course you have the team that you go through the process with. Okay. Another set of considerations is the environment. And this is something that has been touched on today, actually a couple different times. Our very first panel today was on neuroarchitecture. And we had a group of academics and scientists come and really explain how a lot of amazing things about how we can manipulate the felt sense of an environment through certain design elements. Right? Like how can you create a smaller space, make it feel bigger? What's the role of biophilia and biomimicry in spatial design? It was great. I dedicated a chapter in my book to this subject, and I brought in some of those principles even back then because the space that we're in matters. The setup of that space matters. Right now, you guys are all minions, right? You're subjects because I've set up a room where I'm up here in front of you with a podium and a microphone and you're sitting at chairs and I'm in a position of authority. And that's been ingrained in you since you were young children. And what I'm teaching you beyond the words that comes out of my mouth is about power, right? You're sitting there one day thinking, maybe I can be the person on the other side of that mic. Or when you're a kid in school, maybe I can be the expert that's conveying this knowledge, right? And that sets up this whole power dynamic throughout our life, and I really don't enjoy it. So when I teach and whenever I get an opportunity, I like to turn rooms into chaotic structures or circles or just something different than people expect. That small thing makes a big difference. So let me give you an example. If I lay on the floor now, there's nothing I can say that you're going to take seriously, you know? Versus if I came up here and I stood on top of this table, one, I'd have to owe the Minge some money because I'd break it, but it would change things. It would change the dynamic. And this was another fun thing I used to do with CEOs, is I would make them stand on chairs, lay on floors, and try to give their like visionary talk from a beanbag. And they'd be like, this is ridiculous. And the point I was trying to make is that how your relationship to the people in the room around you really impacts the delivery of your message. The same thing's true with everything else that we put into a space. So spatial design is very important in terms of the physical space and the arrangements of things in the space, but also the semiotics of the space, right? One of the things I really enjoyed doing is I used to put little posters on the wall that had statements, and I would never mention them during I wouldn't like point out and be like, those are the rules of dialogue, right? But I would just have it on the door. And one of the signs I had over the door of the Co-Creation Institute, it said, no trademarks, no egos. That was it. I never mentioned any of these signs, but guess what? People look at them, whether they consciously or subconsciously recognize that, Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But they look at them and it impacts how they act in those spaces. So I'm not going to go into any more detail now, but I just want to point out that the spaces are important. The language and the signs that we embed in the spaces are important to how people experience those spaces. And then finally, there's program design and facilitation. So I've talked a little bit about program design so far. And where I want to take it from now is talking about facilitation. So this is my mad scientist experiment. Earlier today, I was on a different panel and I was talking about when I had a room full of sticky notes and strings and text and pictures, and I called in my research team and I said, I figured it out. And they said, figured out what? And I said, I figured out the secret to innovation. And they said, what is it? And I pointed at the wall and I said, don't you see it? And they said, we see the fact that you need to go home and get some sleep. That was actually a reference to this diagram. And what I realized at the time was that there is a universal grammar that underlies every innovation framework I have ever studied. Okay, so when we think about how you map out the creative process over time, this common structure is a sine wave. It's a pattern that is, and a movement really that's ubiquitous to natural and human world. From waves in the ocean to the human voice, sine waves are an integral part of our universe. And so perhaps we shouldn't be so surprised that the creative process also moves like a wave. In our history, a great many innovations have come from biomimicry, designing based on forms found in the natural world. So why not creativity itself? Now this journey is an oscillation between what we know and we don't know. So the worlds of the known and the unknown. It actually reflects the insight of a German physiologist, Hermann von Helmholtz. He developed a three-stage model of creativity: saturation, incubation, and illumination. Okay. In the language of serious gameplay, the core movements of each stages are divergence, emergence, and convergence. Now, divergence and convergence should sound awfully familiar because that's what the double diamond is based off of. But what happened to emergence? Why did it get cut out of the equation? Okay, all of the models I just talked about emphasize the need to spend time in the unknown, despite the fact that the unknown can be a very uncomfortable space. Now, humans are incredibly creative, and we tend to jump to solutions very quickly when given problems to solve. And that's what the double diamond reflects, right? You've got this problem where you have divergence and convergence, you develop a point of view, and the moment you have a point of view, you come up with your how might we questions, and you jump into solutions for those. Well, my argument is that we're missing something here, okay? Because when we don't explore, challenge, and reframe our perspectives, then we're bound to come up with inferior solutions because we are acting entirely upon past knowledge, not new knowledge, okay? The unknown is where new knowledge is generated. It's also where the best ideas come from. Unfortunately, this is also a place of fear and uncertainty. And both product teams and products can fail very easily here. And this is probably why most facilitators skip over it as fast as possible. Go, people are uncomfortable, let's not do that. I'm the guy who says, you're uncomfortable, sit in it, right? Why are you uncomfortable? Because that uncomfort is telling us something. And if we actually take the time to explore that, then it might reframe our perspective. So building upon these foundations of other people's work, I pose the co-creative journey as a universal grammar or a process architecture that a lot of different techniques can get mapped to. And what this does is it allows for a range of different tools and facilitation styles. The specific methods matter less than facilitating the flow and managing the key dynamics of this journey. And so that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. I'm not going to sit there and talk about any particular tool or technique because there's a bunch, hundreds of them in fact. All of them are great, okay? But how you map those into a larger journey for people really matters. So the journey begins here with what we call the climb, okay? And here in the climb, what we're trying to establish first is a collective intelligence, okay, that we then use to co-create and deliver our outcomes. This collective intelligence has two dimensions, okay? The first dimension is the knowledge dimension, right? So we want to go from individual knowledge, which is not a very low level of sharing, to a collective knowledge, which has a very high level of sharing, okay? At the same time, we want to develop the capacities of our team, okay? So something like social emotional intelligence training, or awareness training, or teaching leadership capacities that Madison was speaking to earlier today. You know, learning how to hold spaces and hold and navigate tensions. These are all skills that you're going to need for the coming journey. Okay, then it's about the team. Okay, so if you put together people with similar backgrounds and skills, you're going to end up with a team that's pretty homogeneous. Okay, these teams may get along very well, but rarely do they think outside the box. The problem is they're just too similar. If, however, you form a team with stakeholders from very diverse backgrounds, it might look more like this. Okay, now diverse teams have a lot more potential for conflict, but they also have a much broader range of knowledge to tap into. So what are we trying to accomplish here? We're trying, if you look at this team and you think about the knowledge that each person has upon it, if you just look at the areas of overlap, this is your first state of shared knowledge, okay? But you have knowledge that sits still outside that, and you want to expand that central shared knowledge so that you develop a collective shared knowledge, okay? And eventually, you can expand the boundaries of that to this. And this is a form of shared knowledge where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. To reach this goal, though, we have to set the container. Now, the container itself is a safe and courageous space. By safe, I mean free to take risks, to challenge ideas, and to be challenged. It's a space of trust in which people are authentic and respect each other, which fosters a separation of egos from ideas so that ideas can be deconstructed and reworked without any sense of, oh, you're attacking me. Right? This is something I try to teach the students at UCSD all the time. I'm like, it's okay to be critical of ideas, and you can do it without being critical of the person who put the ideas in front of you. And any of us who teach people how to do good critiques, this is a really important lesson, is that separation of self from your idea. Because otherwise, anytime someone gives you a critique, you take it personally, and that's not very productive. Right? So that's one of the skill development pieces, is helping people learn to separate those two things. Okay? The container is really a situated reality. It's a mini culture that supports the creative process, and it's temporal. And it's not something that you expect people to behave that way all the time, but you say, for this period of time, for this particular project, let's try to work differently. You can't have a team culture where people fear risk and failure and are unconsciously self-editing all the time, and then expect that team to turn all that stuff off when it's time to be creative and rah-rah get together and be innovative, right? How many of you have been in a creative process where one of your superiors is in the room and you're just like, I can't actually say what I think right now? That should be everyone, right? We've all been there, right? When I work with clients, sometimes I have to ask the client, I'm like, how much can I press your buttons, right? Is it okay to tell you that your baby's ugly? And I'm talking about products here, not human babies. Right? But I know by the laughter in the room that you guys were thinking a different direction, and that's okay. You're human. Right? So this is important. If you can't tell someone the truth about how you feel, then it's not co-creation, it's just following. So if you want to have a creative team, you have to ask yourselves, what are the conditions in which my team can thrive the best? And then what are the tools and processes that will enhance those capacities? Both are required for next level adaptive cultures of innovation. Now this is a quote from Nick Udall of the Nowhere Group in London. I'm a big fan of Nick's work. They do pretty amazing things. And the point here is that if you don't establish this container, co-creation is difficult, if not impossible. As such, it's important that we think about designing this container before the program ever starts. Okay, the metaphor the Nowhere group likes to use is that of getting ready to get on a roller coaster ride with people that you barely know, right? And you want to walk up to the roller coaster and you got this cart and it's supposed to convey this sense of safety for this terrorizing journey of ups and downs and highs and lows and fast and slows. Well, that's kind of like the creative process, right? So you got to think, what type of cart do I want to be in? Is the bar actually safe? When it goes upside down, am I going to fall out, right? If you build a good container, then the team has a much better ability to ride that creative roller coaster together. Unfortunately, most of the teams that I've worked with over the years rarely have the time or the interest in what they call culture building or team building, which is what they see this stuff as. That's a naive perspective. It's a lot, yes, culture and team building are integral ingredients of it, but it's a lot more than that. And honestly, if they don't get that, then I don't want to work with them anyway. The few people that I've worked with over the years that really do get this have transformative experiences, not just in terms of coming up with amazing new ideas or solving problems, but the people themselves transform. And when they come out of it, you get people that have never met each other before suddenly being best friends for the next 20 years. And believe me, I've experienced this myself with Brains on the Beach and the Nowhere group and some of these teams that I work with. It's been amazing. I love it. Now here's the scary part. Okay, once you've developed a foundation of shared knowledge, you've set the container, now it's time to take that roller coaster journey. And when you get to the peak of what you know, it's then time to dive into what you don't know. Because you're searching for something new here. This is where you're looking for new ideas. You're hoping that something emerges. That's not just an incremental innovation, that's easy, but rather something that's fundamentally different and evoking. Okay, and this is a lot like the hero's journey. Are you familiar with Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey? All right, this is the dark forest that's full of trials and tribulations, and you have to be tested as individuals and as a team. Okay, and so the team can come together here, or it can fall apart. And that's why we need to have that container in the first place. Okay, this is where we're trying to really fully establish the space between and tap into that collective intelligence. And it's not easy. So what I want to spend a few minutes on is just talking about some of those dynamics, those emotional and team dynamics I referred to, and how to mitigate and how to manage those as you take people through a process like this. Okay, this image here represents a series of tensions that are very common and very natural. One of the things that I really emphasize when I get to work with facilitators is that conflict's not a bad thing. Okay, doubt is not a bad thing. Okay, these are tensions that are very natural, and if you just put a set of logos on the wall and a banner that says, hey, everybody be open and authentic and trust each other and be nice and listen and take turns and we're going to be great, you're fooling yourselves. Because people might aspire to those things, but we cannot live up to them. Because if you pressed me hard on something I was passionate about, I'm going to push back hard. Now, I'm going to compromise eventually and listen, but I'm a human being, right? And I think my baby's beautiful. So you tell me my baby's ugly, I'm going to have the same result that everybody else in the room would have. Be like, really? Yours is dumb too, right? Like, and then we have to get past that. So trying to pretend that we won't do that is simply not understanding people, right? It's about managing it and actually at times encouraging it. I hate it when creative teams get along too well. Like, right. Like when creative teams get along really well and they go through the whole project and then they get excited and they put the big poster board up, you're like, that's crap. Like half the time. Sometimes it's really good, but half the time you're like, wow, nice, mediocre, right? And then you take the teams that like fought and struggled and they disbanded and they like went red and blue on each other and eventually they made up and then they come back and they're like, our project is junk, I'm sorry, I have to show this to you. And then they put up this amazing thing, you're like, wow, that's completely original. Right? It doesn't always come out this way, but I've watched these dynamics in teams for many years, and there's lots of good studies that show that you need a certain degree of conflict in order to get creativity. Okay, so facilitators have to balance this all the time, right? And we're balancing not only these poles, but we're balancing different team dynamics. Co-creation isn't just channeling conflict and figuring out which of the competing ideas is the best one. It also is not democracy or a groupthink. And when you facilitate co-creation, sometimes it's collaborative work, other times people are working on just the aspect of the project that they're good at, right? And you need to allow for that, but you're bringing it all back together, and you want to oscillate sometimes between these two dynamics. Now, another subject here when we're talking about team dynamics is diversity. And so on the left here we have, what an easy team might look like, right? We've all seen this either in real life or in movies. This team is usually dominated by one point of power. Everybody follows that lead, okay? Now, we talk about very different types of teams, right? Diverse composition. These are the hard teams. These are the difficult teams because they're composed of very different types of people with very different viewpoints. And of course, that means that there is a much greater chance of conflict. So how do we deal with that diversity? Well, there's again a couple models. The command and control model, right? This one's easy. Do what I tell you to, right? And that contrasts the encourage and empower model, right? Which takes a lot more skill as a leader, at least in my personal opinion. But when you do it well, you get a lot more out of your team. So in co-creation, we're really aiming for the encourage and empower model, not the command and control. Now, when it comes to dealing with tension itself, again, there's a couple different ways of looking at it. One, you can try to release and reduce that tension, okay? Or you can try to harness and control that tension. Now, in co-creation, we actually do both. There's times to mediate and there's times to hold it. So we're not shying away from conflict here. What we're doing is we're dividing conflict into its two aspects and dealing with those differently. So what we want to do is cultivate what we call substantive conflict, which is the clash of ideas. And we want to mediate affective conflict, which are relational tensions between people. So it's like, I don't like you. Okay, let's mediate that one. But if it's like, your ideas, let's talk about it, then okay, let's talk about it, right? Those are both conflict, but they're very different. So the synergy of co-creation happens when we hold the tension between these different models and these different dynamics. And what we're trying to do is facilitate a transformation of team dynamics to this truly collective intelligence, which we've illustrated like this. In this visual, insights are emerging from novel intersections in the space between the different actors. Okay, collective intelligence is really the capacity for the group to hold and explore this space between and then act upon those insights elegantly. Now, this image on the left, by contrast, depicts a dialogue or an interaction where even though you have the form of a circular group, one actor dominates that. And as you can see, his or her dominance greatly reduces the communication channels, which in turn reduces the novel intersections and the likelihoods of collective insights. When you're doing programs with people, you can have either one of these. It's from one of these two models that the ideas you want to move forth with emerge. And which one do you think you get better ideas from? Idealistically, yes. But there are also times where you have a very insightful or powerful or innovative person and their idea does dominate and it is the best one. Okay, so both of them can lead to good outcomes. But the number of outcomes of quality and that mutual empowerment that I was talking about in the beginning only comes from the one on the right. So it's really about who are you working with, again, getting back to those stakeholders and the level of control that they want to have in the process. And then what are the qualities of outcomes? If the leader wants to solicit a bunch of ideas from people and we'll go through a co-creative journey, but they're going to be the one that decides, it's the one on the left. Okay? If on the other hand, they're willing to step back and allow the space to emerge on its own, regardless of their power position, then it's going to be the one on the right. And this brings us to our final act. Okay? When successful, co-creation can achieve both practical and experiential outcomes that are designed for. The practical outcomes tend to be new ideas, and most people describe these as having emerged from somewhere without a clear source or origin of that idea. They always talk about it as, insights just kind of pop up out of nowhere, right? These are good signs. And it's not uncommon to see alignment around very different ideas than what came out of those initial brainstorming sessions when we were back in Act 1 of the journey. Okay. Another sign of co-creative success is a change in team dynamics and energy. People talk about synchronicity and enthusiasm. They feel heard and empowered. And most importantly, they actually want to all be part of the next step of things, right? That's a clear sign of mutual empowerment, okay? That's when it's time to move on and get into that solution space that we're all familiar with design thinking models. Now, in my experience, what I've covered already will help improve the creative output of teams. This is the form of co-creation that I have witnessed most often when studying trademarked innovation frameworks. It's also the most common set of processes and outcomes. And it's great and it's manageable with teams as they currently are. It works. But I think we can do better. It's my belief that we can, in fact, design for breakthroughs. And so let me ask you a question. This is where I get philosophical with you guys, just to put a bookmark in this. Okay. Our answer to this is something that we call resonant co-creation, which is the same process I just described, okay, but where the creative outputs get amplified. And that amplification comes from the capacity building of the team itself. It is a transformation of worldview, which is a combination of beliefs, attitudes, and values that structure our experience. Transforming that generates new conceptual and interrelational spaces between participants that's conducive to strategic innovation. Now, I say the word conducive very intentionally. If someone comes to me and says, can you guarantee me a breakthrough? The answer is no. No one can guarantee a breakthrough. But what I can do is I can promise that if you trust me, that I can create optimal conditions for a breakthrough. How do we do that? Well, the choice of the term resonant actually stems from Marilyn Schlitz's model of the 5 developmental levels of social consciousness. Resonant consciousness is an expanded awareness that leads to pro-social experiences and behaviors, quote unquote, in which people report a sense of interrelatedness with others, a field of shared experience and emergence that is felt and expressed in social groups. So resonant co-creation requires shared attention, good feelings like trust and empathy, and synchronicity, all of which are integral to what we call the co-creative mindset. And this quote here from the Presencing Institute, I think, says it well. So while I've been using the cooking metaphor for most of my talk, I want to end with a different one. When I think about the instances of resonant co-creation that I've witnessed, the metaphor always comes to my mind is that of a theater performance, a particularly powerful theater performance, one that kind of really moves you. And so take a second here to reflect upon one of those moments that you've experienced, right? What were its characteristics? How much of that experience happened serendipitously, and how much of it was actually designed for? Now, in co-creation, I think of the performative elements as the experience design, the facilitation, and talent. So that third new ingredient is talent development. And when we integrate that into co-creation, we get a new experience that transcends its constituent element to create these truly special moments. And this is when those breakthroughs are most likely. So here is what that combination might look like, right? Part 1 is the process, designing it to have those practical and experiential outcomes. Okay, setting the container, managing flow, thinking of it as an emotional roller coaster to be navigated. Okay, the second part is good facilitation. Okay, guiding people through a program that best serves the need of the group. And key considerations here are maintaining high levels of situational awareness among the participants, giving them a sense of empowerment, creating community. And of course, there's this credo that really good facilitators I know use, which is trust the people, trust the group. Because sometimes things just go nonlinear. And your carefully crafted program just ends up on the floor and people take it in a completely different direction. Now, what do you do? Some facilitators might grab the group and pull them back, to the program that they've carefully designed. But the best facilitators will go, let's see where this goes, right? And allow it to take its own path, and they might gently steer them back eventually, but they give it space, right? That's important. That's the trust that people create. And then, of course, having a good set of tools like focused conversation, action planning, a series of experiential exercises, and different ways of reframing your participants' perspectives, especially when they're in the unknown. And then there's the final ingredient, talent, which is not just the people that you bring to the program, but not just their skills, but their capacities, right? Organizational development for years has shown that soft skills training like mindfulness, appreciative inquiry, emotional intelligence, peer coaching positively affect leadership and innovation. And thank you, Madison, for talking about several of those earlier, right? These are personal growth opportunities that most managers get access to. Well, when we do the same thing for our designers and other creative teams, what we're doing is we're adding that special ingredient like into the recipe that can transform the outcomes. And this is what you get, right? This is resonant co-creation, just looked at differently. And it is my hope that at some point you all will get to experience this because it's truly a special meal. Now tonight I've only touched upon the surface of co-creation, looking at some of the key principles for how you design and facilitate it. If you'd like to learn more, get in touch. And with that, I will bid you good night. Yeah. And if you guys want to be part of Industry Day next year and think about how can we make this bigger and better, please get in touch with us. We're going to be doing it again. All right. Good night.